Ofer Razon, co-founder and CEO at Superwise AI. Welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you, Ben. Pleasure to be here.
So, Ofer, one of your last positions before you started Superwise AI was at Amdocs, where you headed up the AI business unit. But prior to that, you were also involved in product around AI and big data. So, what is it about AI and machine learning that grabbed your attention so much that you decided to start a company?
Yeah, um, definitely. I think that I've been doing AI before it was so popular to call it AI. It was big data, and before that, predictive analytics. And I think that what's fascinating about that is that I like to call it, it's the new generation of software. Well, gone are the days that you count on, being really smart guy and develop everything, all the things that are so sophisticated because you designed it, you coded it, and now it's going to work fantastic. The new generation of software is all about dynamic software that automatically learns from data, and data is a representation of the world, and the world keeps changing. So is your software, needs to keep evolving, keep changing. And that's a really, really fascinating area because it kind of provide us as users of this technology the superpowers that otherwise we couldn't get. So I'm really, really, really excited about the domain, as well as the challenges, the operational challenges that this domain introduces.
So, while you were in your previous role, so what was it about building machine learning and AI applications that you noticed was particularly challenging?
So the number one, my previous role at Amdocs, I worked a lot with C-level executives of probably every telco on the planet. And that was always interesting because it was a few years ago when people started to realize that AI and machine learning is something that they need to have on their agenda. And you could see the confusion. You could see the confusion because most of them were in the phase that they kind of, they hired a group of data scientists and they put some big data Hadoop infrastructure to be in place and collect a lot of data. And in some cases, this group of data scientists really came up with something super, super interesting that they discovered and could develop. But then again and again and again, when you ask the CIO or the CTO, okay, so how it's going to look like when you're going to really use it at scale? What's going to happen next? Okay, they're done. They're done. They just developed the most sophisticated algorithm with a super sophisticated and rich data. Fantastic. Now what? You as a CIO, how do you take that now and really put it in telco? One of the things that everyone in telco knows is that everything should be 5.9, fully operational, high availability. How's going to happen? And what's going to happen on the day after? And I remember seeing again and again and again CIOs, CTOs of big groups, of huge telcos, scratching their heads and asking, you know what? I have no clue. I don't really know. It's a new technology. Maybe I should ask the data scientists. You know what? They have no idea. And that kept repeating again and again and again. And when I talked about it with Oren, who saw that from another angle, working with customers, developing machine learning solutions and AI solutions for them. And then when the money time came in, they were afraid to launch it and trust it because they didn't know how it's going to operate on day two. It was a bingo. It was clear to us that this is a huge, huge, huge problem that needs a solution that is currently in a vacuum.
And actually, we've had a few conversations in the past, and I think I was describing to you my interest in this whole category of managing risks around ML, which in my mind includes a bunch of things, including safety and reliability, privacy and security, fairness and bias, explainability, reproducibility, and all of those things. And then you folks at Superwise that AI started to build some tools to kind of begin realizing this vision, and then you started describing this set of tools as AI assurance, which I think is very similar to what I just described. So, but for our audience, so in your mind, what is AI assurance, and why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, so let's start from the top. AI assurance is all about assuring that your AI is going to operate in an optimal and risk-free method over time. This is the objective that the AI assurance is all about. And that's this statement, optimal and risk-free operation of AI at scale over time is comprises of so many things. So one thing is about monitoring your models to make sure that they act as expected and they don't have any performance pitfall, whether it's a global phenomena or local, maybe in a specific audience, a specific subgroup of your data, a specific segment of your customers, where your model is performing not as good as you expect. And that's one category. The other category of capability in this space is the ability to actually have the observability and the transparency that you want to look and understand how your model really operates, and all the analytics and the insights that you want to get by looking at the way that your model operates, analyzing, just kind of a model analytics set of capabilities that allows you to really understand what's going on in the way that your model operates, whether it's about the data that it's processing, the inference that gets out of the model, the performance, and slice and dice it to different subgroup, weak spots, they identify weak spots of your model, as we call it, look at specific segments and dimensions, rich set of analytics that you need to have in order to have the observability and the transparency to really understand what's going on. The third thing you mentioned, bias and fairness. So a lot of the issues around bias has to do with the way that you develop and build your data sets during the development of your models. But how do you make sure that your bias levels or unbiased levels remain in your safety zone when this model goes live? Because you don't have any control anymore about the data that it's going to meet, the feedback that's going to come back, and so on.
But so Oren, so just generally in your mind, having come from a company that deployed a lot of ML models, who are the stakeholders for such an AI assurance tool? Is it just the technical people? Is it just data scientists? So is the idea here that as AI and machine learning cuts across so many products and systems that you're going to have tools that can be used by cross-functional teams, right?
Absolutely. We see three stakeholders. We see, the data science, data engineering stream, and that's pretty much falls under the MLOps, model ops approach, where as part of the overall process of developing, deploying, running, and monitoring a model, you need to have the assurance capabilities to make sure that your model behaves well and you have the visibility on how it really operates in production.
So let me stop you right there. So just to clarify, you're not saying that AI assurance happens only after you deploy the model. It actually permeates the entire stages, all the stages of developing a model as well.
I think much of the work is in production, but some of it definitely happens along the way. Definitely happens along the way. And in any case, even the production assurance need to be aware to what happened before, because otherwise you're out of context. And so that's one dimension. The second dimension is about the risk management, the business view of AI and the trust around AI. And that's where you meet people and talk about responsible AI, risk management around AI. That's where we see our customers, where we see the business function using our system to understand whether they can rely on what the AI system comes up with or not. We have one customer that is using machine learning models built to predict the potential customer lifetime value of their target audiences. And this is a critical input for the marketing team to constantly tune the campaigns and the millions of dollars that they spend on social media and advertising. Now, the problem that they had is that, this business-oriented, the marketing analyst and the business functions, they used to look at this model and they weren't really sure if they can trust it or not, and they couldn't explain. Sometimes they had this feeling that something doesn't feel well and doesn't look well, but they had no way to really know that besides bumping the data science team and trying to fight for their attention to make sure that things are okay now. And then the next day comes back, the issue comes back, and they're not really sure. And now with Superwise, they look into the system and they really know if they can trust or whether or not, or whether they have any risk with the decisions that they're going to take based on the model or not, and whether we identify a specific population of customers where the model identifies a change of behavior. And that's fantastic. And the main feedback that these people give to us, to Superwise, is that finally they're independent and they can really rely on what they see. So that's the second practice and the second stakeholder for AI assurance. Definitely when you go to banks and you talk with risk management team, you cannot do risk management today if you're not aware of what's going on inside these models.
Ofer, to what extent can some of what you described be obviated by just including some of the business units and business owners, get them involved during the model building process? So, in other words, if they worked with the ML or data science team and they felt like they had some input and they had an understanding of how this model was getting built, some of what you described can be minimized, right?
Part of it can be minimized if they have better awareness and visibility to how the model really operates. But and that's what we see with our customers. In many cases, remember that this is a one-off effort, and you do that once. But then this model goes to the real world, and that's where this model starts to meet different behaviors, changing reality. And at some point, even the data scientists cannot really explain why decisions are being taken as they are, even though they know how they build the model. They're not really sure why the model is now behaving as it is. And what's really, what we usually see is that even if they see that something is not behaving well, usually it's too late. Usually they notice that something is not working well only when the business impact is already done. Only when, let's take this marketing example, only when they see that the conversion rate is not as they expected, and that's usually 3 weeks too late. We have another customer dealing with fraud detection. Usually it might take them a few weeks before they notice that something in the fraud detection model didn't operate well. We have another customer in finance lending and dealing with credit risk. It might take months before they will realize that the model is out of control and then is out of sync, is not in a healthy mode, and only then they will start to interrogate. So
So explain to our audience why that might be, because surely some of these companies have at least basic uh, monitoring tools where they can see uh, some change in performance or business metrics, right?
okay, so two parts to this question. One is a capabilities gap. The capabilities gap, you know, when we talk with people that actually do machine learning and AI, most of them, when you ask them about monitoring, they will say, yeah, for sure, we do the monitoring to make sure that the servers are up and running and the processes are there and the response time, the delay time in the decision is no more than 100 milliseconds, and we have enough scalability and all the IT-related measurements. That's not enough. It doesn't mean that what goes in is the right stuff and what goes out is the right decision. Those that are a bit more advanced, they have some measurements. Usually, they will look for extreme situations. They have some rules around the data. Rules that a human being can define. So if we're looking at the amount of transaction, warn me if you see more and more transactions that are above $10,000. Okay. And in many cases, the way that they measure performance is by looking at the ground truth, collecting the ground truth, and then they monitor the performance based on the ground truth. But again, take the few examples that I gave earlier. In the marketing use case, it might take 3 weeks before the ground truth come back. You know how much money can they spend on the wrong people in 3 weeks? That's a lot of money. And the fraud detection, sometimes it might take 4, but it might take also 12 weeks before the ground truth indication will come back. On financing and lending, it might take months. So measuring your performance just by looking at the ground truth is looking at the back mirror. No more than that. No more than that. You need to be on your toes and make sure that what happens now is good. And the fact is that trying to answer this question just by looking at a few thresholds is almost a naive way to assume that you're on top of things, because we know this creature. We know how machine learning models operate, and we know that in many cases, variations are multidimensional. In some cases, you need to really understand the nuances to understand what is an outlier and what is not an outlier. You need to identify all these subgroups, all these weak spots of your model and make sure that they don't grow. And you need to do a lot of sophisticated stuff. And I think that you started to write about it a few years ago, Ben, talking about the need for machine learning.
Right. So help our audience understand. So if I have one or two models, and I start monitoring all of these metrics and possible anomalies that you're saying, okay, so that might be doable. But as the number of models grow, how do you make sure that someone doesn't get overwhelmed with all the things that they need to keep track?
And that's when talking about machine learning for machine learning, or AI for AI, as we like to call it in many cases, it's not just about telling you that there was a change. It's also about understanding which changes really matter. And with those that started to implement more advanced monitoring capabilities, whether they built themselves or implemented some tools from the industry, I think that the main feedback was that they got a lot of noise that was meaningful for them. They couldn't do anything with that. Part of the trick here is to really make sure that you point and create an alert on things that really matter, that really affect your business, especially if you have multiple models that get the feed, they get the same data feed, and something is wrong with this data feed. You don't need to get 17 alerts. It's enough to get one. A lot of what we're doing
so this is an impossible question in many ways, but at a high level, in your mind, so what are some of the most basic metrics that people sometimes forget to track?
So um, the the data drift, and we actually come up with a formula to measure your data drift and give it a score. The data drift, the inference drift are super, super, super important. Looking, based on your feature importance, and that's something that we calculate automatically. You don't need to tell us anything. Based on your feature importance, look for outliers, new values on specific on these features, and also look for the combination of features to identify, again, we call it weak spots. Always keep, stay on your toes, looking for weak spots of your model. Look for areas that, even though it might be that your overall performance looks good, it might be that you have a new population of data, a new segment of data, a new type of customers where your model doesn't do as well. And as long as this group is tiny, who cares? But if this starts to grow, you need to be aware to that. So these are some basic capabilities that need to be in place.
So what about process-wise, Ofer? Because in the sense that in many ways, as you mentioned, there's a new term in industry called MLOps, which takes inspiration from continuous integration and continuous deployment in software engineering. So the idea here is that you can more quickly deploy models to production if you have these tools that allow you to operationally tie together different stages of the machine learning pipeline. But where does AI assurance come into uh, how does AI assurance interact with the desire of some companies to move fast?
Yeah. I want to take it
Is AI ops going to be one of these kind of blockers for teams where man, we can't do anything because the AI ops or the AI assurance people want us to go through this massive checklist of things before we can deploy anything?
So no, I don't think that that's what's going to happen. I think that there will be some governance, and there will
Yeah,
be some and that's
reviewing, right?
reviewing. I think that the name of the game, and that's part of this theme of AI for AI, is to automate as much as possible, use smart and sophisticated systems like ourselves to automatically discover issues and reduce the need to go through tedious and manual labor-oriented processes. But I want to take your question also to another aspect, and that has to do with the third stakeholder for AI assurance, which is the operations. Over time, eventually, it's not there right now, over time, one day, this AI ops problem will be another thing in what we call today DevOps. And the fact is that today, if you go to DevOps team, if you go to the IT operations team, this issue of AI and machine learning, they have nothing to do with that. They have nothing to do with that. It's the data. Usually, one of the things that I always love to do when I meet customers is ask them, okay, who owns your models when they go live? Who's the owner? Who is the one that needs to be awake at night and make sure that your model is healthy right now? And it's always funny to see the answers and the reactions, especially if there are different teams in the room. Because the data science team, unfortunately for them, they are the only ones that can do that today. They don't want to do that. They prefer to invest their time in doing research and developing new stuff. Especially as in many cases, the issues in production are not about the model, are about the data, changes in the environment, a campaign that someone just launched, a change in the product. So many things that are not about the algorithm. So the data science team are probably the only ones that can do that today, but they don't feel ownership and they don't want to be the owners. But all the rest, they don't even know how to look at that. So I think that the third stakeholder, and as we like to talk about the machine learning evolution, going through the same path that software went through, I think that at some point it will happen that the DevOps and the operational teams will take ownership on this AI ops thing, and they will own that, and they will. And that's the currently it's a gap. It's a gap in the industry. So one gap is the capabilities gap that we discussed earlier, and the other gap is the ownership gap. And this gap will definitely our view is very clear. It will be addressed by the DevOps team eventually. And that's why we built a solution that eventually will be consumed both by a data scientist that want to know what's going on, but also by a non-data scientist, an operational person that doesn't need to do and know much about AI and algorithms and data science, but they need to understand what's going on and the flow of data and the flow of decisions.
But as you pointed out, there's also the business units in the mix, right? So in terms of you've got the people who built the model, which might include data scientists and business people, and then the operations people. So then ultimately, then is this something that so a tool like Superwise then the front end might be consumed by data scientists and business people, but it's ultimately owned by DevOps. Is that
So it's I wouldn't say that it's owned by one and used by others. I think that it's going to serve three different users. The data scientist, by the way, a lot of the data science must have such a tool. You know, one of the main thing that we keep hearing from customers is that, and that's always funny because we as data science, the data science community, we always like to be data driven. But when you ask people on the data science community, how do you retrain your model? How do you decide when to retrain your model? They just give you an answer once a week, once a month. And you ask, why? How did you get to this conclusion? Which data did you use to reach to this 1 week, 1 month answer? They have no answer because it is. That's the answer. So they will get, there are one stakeholder that will get a lot of value by understanding how their models operate and how to build better models into the future and how to tune their models and retrain their models and build new versions automatically. The second group are the business people that will get the confidence and the independence to really understand what's going on and the indication that they can rely or not, learn from the system what's going on. And the third users are the operational people that will get the alerts, will get the insight, will get the root cause analysis, will be able to run automatic optimizations. Three different users. I think that the ownership right now sits more on the data science, data engineering, machine learning platform side. And you know what? They will be the owners because those that build the platform need to think about these three stakeholders. And they will be the owners. But it will serve the three parties that I mentioned.
so? You describe an overarching vision, which I find quite compelling of what should happen. But what about? So let me push back and ask you a question about what might likely happen in the following sense. Okay, so I'm a company. I'm starting to roll out machine learning. Um, which means I'm deploying it to production, which means I have some model serving tools. And then I realized that, so if I'm going to deploy this to production, I should have some tools around monitoring these models, um, and possibly even providing some of the basic alerts that you described. So then it might be the case. So there's a strong case to be made that the evolution might be, here's a model server, and the model servers start adding basic monitoring capabilities, and then they start providing dashboards that multiple teams from different backgrounds can consume, and then people will say, that's it. That's the end of the story. We're now at AI assurance nirvana.
You know what? Maybe for some segments of the market, what you just described might be a good enough solution, an all-in-one solution. Yeah, it might be that for people that implement 1 or 2 or 3 use cases in a very simple environment with very basic data sets, it might be a good enough solution and fantastic. We want that to happen. We don't want people to release AI, which is not governed. Fantastic. You don't expect these people to invest a lot in building, the best solutions to guard. Yeah, it's good enough. But for those that do machine learning at higher scale, it will never be enough. And they will need the more sophisticated set of capabilities. They will need to keep an objective view. By the way, monitoring machine learning, part of it is about looking at the way that inference is done, but a lot of it is to understand the data, which is not part of the machine learning platform. Correlated with external data in some cases, which is not part of the machine learning platform. So yeah, I think that what you described is definitely going to happen, but it's going to be a good fit for some segments of the market.
By the way, so I'm curious on a personal note. So you were at Amdocs working on machine learning and AI, but of all the areas you could have focused on, you could have focused on the model building phase or some other aspect of machine learning. Why did you focus on AI assurance?
First of all, I was excited by the fact that 2 years ago it was clear, very clear view that there is a huge problem, and now we talk about model ops and we talk about AI assurance and monitoring. When we started to think about Superwise, people didn't really understand what we're talking about. So first of all, it's really exciting to understand that you're ahead of the curve. And you can execute on that and be right on time with the right solution to the market. So by itself is an exciting thing personally. Beyond that, if you think about the scope of the problem, again, I know that many people deal and struggle with the phase of building and collecting the right data and building models in the right way. But as I said, this is a one-off thing. Relatively in a stable environment, if you think about what's going to happen next, the time that a model spends in development versus the time that a model spends in real life, the value that the model generates and that, the empowerment that the model has when it's in development versus the empowerment that the model has when it's in real life, it's clear where the value sits, the production, the real life, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's real life. And that's exciting.
So where are we today as far as AI assurance, the concept, set aside the term because people might use different terms, but the concept of AI assurance, how much education do you feel like you still need to do, and how receptive are people to the notion of AI assurance?
Yeah. So the short answer is a lot of education. I think that the main reasons for that is that still most of the people that are doing AI, most of the efforts around AI still don't get to production. But this is changing very fast, and more people face the reality of what we call day two challenges, and they understand that it's not as simple as it's not magic. That it's not magic, and someone told me this sentence that probably monitoring is the last thing that you think about when you're dealing with building your models, but then it's the first thing that you care about when you launch your models. So as more and more people get to this production phase, the awareness to the problem is increasing. Still, many people are not really aware because there are no common practices in the industry. What is a good monitoring for your model? And I think that ourselves, along with other few pioneers in this space, companies like Fiddler and Arthur and Mona and Arise, and we're a bunch of advanced experts that trying to share our knowledge with the market and educate people how to do it right. And it's exciting to see that people get it. And when you sit with people and explain what needs to be done, they immediately get it. And when they see the simplicity, like when we do demos to people, they immediately get it and they actually they are a bit embarrassed how they didn't think that they need such a thing before. But that's okay, and that's a common reaction.
So
So yes,
here's a super naive question and naive take, which I know the answer to, but uh, I'd like you to explain to the audience why this is such a poorly thought out uh, approach to these problems that we're talking about. Hey, I want to do machine learning. I hear that the cloud providers have machine learning tools. I'll use their machine learning tools. Some of them might even be pre-trained models, and I'll just deploy. And they have magical auto ML. They know exactly when to fix things. So I'm good to go, right?
yeah, I just want to educate you with one very simple, with 4 words: GIGO. You know what's GIGO? Garbage in, garbage out. And by the way, in many cases, these tools will do it automatically. They will do automatic processing of garbage in, garbage out. If you just think about the mechanics and the cloud and the AutoML, and you don't really care about what gets into your model and what goes out of your model, then definitely you're super naive.
Here's another question, which is a little more practical and more serious, which is I'm I work in a company. We're starting to get into AI. We're starting to deploy a few models in production. I want the rest of my organization to take AI assurance more seriously. What are some basic steps that I should do in order to? And the answer can't be bring in Superwise.
No. That's they know that. I don't
Yeah,
need to tell them that.
yeah.
I think that a few things. One, and this is what we see with people that we interact with. One, it always works well. Everyone that is doing machine learning in production suffers from cases. There's always something that happened, at least once a month. By the way, people don't like to talk about it, but things happen. I think that the first thing is to take a few of these cases and think, how could we avoid that? What are the measures that could be there on time that could help us to avoid this glitch that we had, this wrong spend on marketing, the fact that we didn't catch the right fraud, the fact that we approved the wrong loans. We had this glitch of our model. Let's take that and analyze what could we have in place and how fast could we identify things. And that's always fascinating because people realize that they could really avoid a lot of internal issues and issues with their customers and spending their own money. Second, I think that it's about drawing the new reality around the process. And that's a bit tricky. I think that the fact that people can draw to the business analyst, to the operational teams, to the data science, to the head of data science, how much of the work can now be automated and be done better and be done in a more governed way, because it's going to be automated in a tool that's draw the new reality to the team. Draw the new reality of what are the capabilities, the ownerships, and the clarity that people will get. By the way, that's a tricky part because we saw that in this phase, some people push back, saying what you said before. Hey, so wait a second. So I'm now going to be bothered with alerts and insights. What am I? Does it mean that I need to do more work now? I'm going to have more work because I'm going to have more insights. Well, sometimes you just, better, operate in the dark. And if you prefer to do that, fantastic. But so that's a tricky part. And that's part of the objections that people push back on because they don't want to have another set of work. But, if you take the first part and you show how could we avoid glitches and issues, that's a huge thing. And the third is, not talking about Superwise, it's easy to start. It's easy to start. AI assurance, AI monitoring is not something that requires you to take a dramatic decision about changing your platform, moving to a different cloud, implementing a whole new infrastructure in your organization. What's really nice about AI assurance, when it's done right is that it's non-intrusive, and you can start seeing what can be done, and easy start. It's a key thing to to try and grow. That's a third practice that I recommend to people.
So here's and I generally don't know what your take is on this, which is basically so AI assurance to me tells me the term communicates something around the quality and the state of the models and all of this. But is there an angle of this offer that's more around security? In other words, is there does AI in your mind? Do you think at some point AI assurance will also cover or security and privacy in the following sense that some of these AI assurance tools might even have the equivalent of penetration testing and for AI where they attack AI models, and so this is down the road, obviously.
It's definitely down the road and definitely part of at least our roadmap. Data poisoning, adversarial attacks on models, trying to fool the model with the wrong data to lead
So
to the
even
wrong
before
decisions.
people deploy to production, or even while it's in production, it's probing every now and then to make sure
Absolutely,
the model
absolutely.
is robust.
Absolutely. And again, I think that we are still at very, at early days of real use of people of machine learning and AI in production, at super early days of AI assurance and monitoring practices. And when we think about the scope of problems for AI assurance, we know now that it's huge and it's going to be even bigger.
So,
Uh,
so you, in your mind, in your vision, security is part of the mix.
Absolutely.
Um, and with that, thank you, and we'll make sure people. I'll make sure that we have links to Superwise. They're doing some really interesting things in the space, and if you're interested in understanding how you can raise the bar inside your company in terms of machine learning and AI practices and operations, make sure you follow superwise.ai. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.